Hey everybody, today I am going to be reviewing Stalker. This film came out in 1979. It was directed by Tarkovsky. He is one of the most revered and legendary in the history of filmmakers, in the history of auteur filmmakers, often mentioned among the likes of people like Stanley Kubrick. Many relate the two because of their very immersive, very hypnotic types of styles with very long, very fluid, drawn-out camera shots that feel more like meditative experiences, and their films are both often skeletal in terms of story. He has more of a poetic grace, and he captures more abstract textures to me than the overall big picture. And he makes the illusion the point of exploration, where everything does fade away. Time does really slow down when you're watching this movie, and he has this quality where all the images seem to fade and kind of blend into one another. And it becomes this sort of, stunning tapestry or mosaic from far away, which kind of reminds me of somebody like Ingmar Bergman. And Bergman has, been very vocal about his admiration for Tarkovsky in the past. The openness with which he explores silence in his film and explores really just, haunting faces and the expression of them without words reminds me of somebody like Carl Dreyer, who I've talked about many times as one of my favorites. And he's the kind of person who allows tension to build in such a way where it reminds me of something like Klimtov's Come and See. These are all wonderful people to be compared to, and yet Tarkovsky somehow sets himself apart even from them because he has a sort of deep poignance, a deep resonance, I think, within his soul that he's able to communicate through the images in a way that very few people can. It's a level that it transcends a lot of the integrity and honesty of a lot of even some of these great filmmakers. His desire to communicate kind of the ecstasy of feeling, enlightenment, pain, anguish, all within the same moment, I think allows for each scene and each shot to be full of so many facets. And I think few capture that emotion and that simplicity with such intent. It's a very kind of interesting dichotomy. And when I first saw Stalker, I was actually kind of surprised by it, compared to maybe other Tarkovsky works, because it is maybe different in approach. He did another sci-fi film called Solaris years before, and yet this one is a completely different approach than that one. And then, he had done Mirror a few years before, which is very different as well. And that one was very, very tough to get off the ground. And yet, even through the difficulties of that production, Stalker was even worse. And, like Apocalypse Now, the backstory behind this film in terms of how it was made, it's almost as fascinating as the end product. And as I said, Stalker is more of a literal concept that is explored more through the metaphysical. And it is loosely based on a novel here, but unsurprisingly, a lot of the external aspects, a lot of the plotting of that film is really stripped back to its most basic, most skeletal elements here. The story is a simplified sort of Rorschach test that allows you to attach your own meaning to it, I think. And you see many of the internal conflicts within the human mind somehow personified. Somehow, it's literal. It becomes this metaphysical construct that our characters have to navigate here. And it opens up a lot of ambiguity when you strip everything back like that in a lot of ways. And there's something about the way that he allows us to fall into this abyss, fall into the screen, where this amazing world he's created, even if it's very simple, it really just marinates, it feels like, within our whole bodies. We feel it. It's like a lake that you can stare into and you see your own reflection, or you see, whatever it is that you see. And that can be a very frightening thing, but an important thing. First time I saw this movie, it actually reminded me of a dream that I had maybe in college. And, it's not a surprising dream for college, but in the dream, I go down into a basement and Jim Morrison and Bob Dylan are down there. And they're both passing a joint, and they're, musing about the world, philosophy, existence. And it was kind of like a left side versus right side of the brain sort of discussion, where one was talking more about how logic is important, rationality as opposed to perceiving the world more through emotion and all of that. And I don't remember how the dream was resolved, but I just remember thinking that this is awesome, and I'm sitting right between them. But the idea of that is, really on a basic level, very similar to this one. You have three men here, and they're more standing for those archetypes in a lot of ways, at certain aspects of the brain, logic versus emotion, through the contrast of the professor, or the professor of science. And then you've got the writer over here, who is more emotionally true to himself. And obviously Tarkovsky really resonates with that character more. And then, of course, there is the stalker himself, who is the one who is transporting these people to their destination, to the zone where their desires hopefully will be fulfilled as is claimed. And Stalker is perhaps the most fascinating character, especially for me, because, you know, it's more like why he's doing something. He is the most elusive of them naturally. He talks about how important it is for him to see, you know, people realize that happiness, have that arc where they finally, you know, get their dreams fulfilled in this way. And that is a noble thing, but it's this reliance on the feeling of hope that somehow becomes a safety net. And somehow, you know, wanting to see other people fulfilled in a way can ironically feel selfish because it's a safety net for your own mind. It's a way for you to have a sort of purpose in this life. The characters here also, you know, they serve more as ideas, and they're not really necessarily characters in the traditional sense. They're not named in the traditional sense. You know, like the professor goes by the name the professor, the writer goes by the writer. And this, of course, reminds me of Christopher Nolan. When you watch this film, I think you'll see a lot of similarities to the way that Nolan approaches film. The idea of constructs and the idea of architecture becoming the metaphysical building blocks to explore the nature of illusions. And in Tenet, for example, like the main character is called the protagonist. He does not have a name. There's a similar sense of ambiguity there, but there is, I think, a huge difference between Nolan and Tarkovsky. I think one is far superior to the other. I think Nolan, though he is very ambitious, I think he is limited in terms of how far he is willing to explore. It is a bit one-sided in terms of the ways that I think he peels back the illusion. I don't think he quite commits to that exploration in the same way. I think he relies a little bit too much on the gimmicks, and he even buys into them in a way that I think naturally limit the overall ideas and the concepts. And often when you look very closely, the internal logic of the films fall apart. So naturally, they just don't mean as much as they could. And Tarkovsky, I think, explores kind of the skeletal construct where the devices themselves are not the focus. Instead, all of these devices and gimmicks, whatever they are, they work together in a way to become something greater. And it's amazing just how much you can feel in a very simple shot. Nothing has to be really specific in terms of the composition or the framing in terms of how it progresses the story, and yet you feel it. And I think it's because he more allows the film to become a personal experience for anyone who watches it. Anybody who watches it could get a completely different feeling from it based on just who they are and their own experiences. Yet the core emotion and the curiosity and that heavy burden of searching for meaning in this life, I think, all feel very distinctly Tarkovsky. Somebody like Christopher Nolan or Stanley Kubrick, as an example, they're more in the head. They're more, I think, cerebral in certain senses, though I will say Kubrick is more cerebral than somebody like Nolan. But Tarkovsky, in contrast, really believes more in the heart and the soul and the spirit so intently that his films feel rooted in the ground, like big trees, rooted in the atmosphere and the detail and the weight of what is unspoken. And it feels like these weeds are constantly growing and twisting underground so that we cannot see it. You feel that internal human struggle within the frame, but it comes so alive in the sense that it feels almost 3D. It feels almost like a first person point of view, like Ellen Klimov's Come and See, like I mentioned before. You are so immersed into the experience, which is why it feels so real and why it feels so very modern. It's the fluidity of those shots and the control that offers a different perspective from these people who are, you know, so confused and so lost and having all of these questions throughout this odyssey for discovery. And it's the dependence on so many long shots that I think allows so much to be revealed, because it takes a lot of time for you to really soak everything in, and he gives you that time in a way that I think most directors are not bold enough to do. It feels like a flower blooming in my mind as I'm allowing each shot to sort of marinate in my brain the way it does, allowing these shots to linger for long periods. I also just love the texture of this film. I love great atmosphere and texture in film when it comes to the world building. You feel the dampness of this film very, very well. The sounds of footsteps in the mud and in the grass are very, very specific. The clangs of machinery, just building tension. All of that is amazing. Little technical flourishes that don't necessarily mean anything, but they just add the thumbprints. They add the soul to this experience. This film is like being in a purgatory. It's a place where you are forced to reflect, and that can be a very scary thing for a lot of people. And we all live on the edge, it feels like, between two very major extremes that are at the opposite end of the spectrum almost all the time. And, you know, we're often complete contradictions as people. We say one thing, we mean another. We think we want all the answers. We think we want all the things until all of a sudden we realize that we are actually afraid of a lot of the aspects of ourselves we don't understand. And that's how I feel about the film. The film is just about the unknown. It's about fear of the unknown, fear of the things that we cannot understand and will never understand, which is why fulfilling one's desires in this fashion, I think, turns out to be much more complicated of an idea than it may initially seem, especially when you're just reading the plot synopsis. What is it that we really want? I don't really know. I don't know what I want. Do I really know who I am? And what I truly want, is it honest? Is it honest to who I am? Is it honest to what I need? Is it meaningful? Or is it there to serve some form of weakness within myself? Am I truly weak at my core? Is this something we are even capable of comprehending? Probably not. Most of the brain is below the surface, like an iceberg, and we'll never see it. It's this daring feeling, this risky feeling to challenge the viewer without necessarily reaching any sort of conclusions in the literal sense. But I think philosophically, Tarkovsky's point of view heavily influences the conclusion. And you feel all of that when you walk away from the film. I think actually you feel it more when you walk away from it than you do when you're watching it. You know, his struggle with the great debate of stability versus wildness, truth versus the illusion of hope. Tarkovsky, I think, understands that there is this need to feel and express in a way that is most honest to us, that is our personal truth, but also understanding that the fundamental aspects of humanity also kind of inform a lot of that emotion. The importance of tradition that causes us to thrive. It is obviously a very complex film, but I think some people find the film to be a little bit too skeletal or perhaps too literal. And I actually do understand that. I don't think that this is a film for everybody, but I think the ones that, you know, if I'm talking about it and it seems like something that would interest you, it probably really will. I think you'll find a lot to admire in this film, particularly if you're just, you know, like a real cinema fan. It has the ability, I think, to change the way that you perceive film. I personally respond really well to it, I think, because I look at it in a different way. You know, I find a lot of the conscious musings of it and the conscious building blocks of the human struggle that they're employing here to be amazing, just because of how well they employ the techniques subtly and the devices subtly, infusing every moment with such craft and such depth of feeling. It has a beat poet energy to it. It is closer to poetry, closer to abstraction, closer to just like, you know, capturing moments and textures more than it is about anything in terms of story or structure, and all of the blending of images and the slowing of time as though we have lost the physical world or have lost reality. It's just something that I really dig, particularly in this film. I really connect with it. And as I said, I think this film is just very special. I think it's very unique, and I think it has a lot more honesty and more dignity than most artists out there. And I think if that's something that really floats your boat, you're going to really, really love this. And if you haven't seen a Tarkovsky film and you are a great lover of cinema, you know, you should do that, because few artists, I think, have work that really sings in this way and that is worth preserving. And that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm gonna go ahead and plug my website. I am an artist and I do commission portraits and prints of my work. And if that's something that you're interested in, you can always go to my website, deepfocuslens.com, and go to the shop. If you have any questions about a commission or something like that, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below. Also, I want to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters. You guys are wonderful. I really, really appreciate your support so much. And if you are interested in becoming a patron, the link for that is below, as well as my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.